What's up, everybody? I'm Stan, and welcome to Detail Comics, where we go over comics in detail. This is Shelf Appeal, the weekly show where I go over the comic books I picked up this week, as well as give you a little bit of information on them and see if there's something that you want to go back to the comic book shop for or not. To start things off, we're going to talk about Venomverse number 3. So this is the Elizabeth Torque variant, and overall, Venomverse has been just a series that I've really enjoyed at this point in time, just for the fun nature of it. You know, I grew up with Venom as a character in the main Spider-Man storyline, so seeing this kind of crossover and various alternate versions of Venom is particularly entertaining. You know, over the course of this one, we actually see the abduction and the actual purpose behind the capture of Venom, Doctor Strange, and we do see the reintroduction of an extremely popular Amazing Spider-Man character that I wasn't really expecting in this storyline. You know, Carnage comes barging out of the multiverse, pulled by the magic of Doctor Strange, and immediately, starts to cause chaos. Since he's going to be a big player in the rest of this series, I can't wait to see what Venomverse number 4 and number 5 bring to the table. Overall, it's a really fun kind of popcorn comic book, and if you're into Venom and if you're into Carnage and those kind of like symbiote Amazing Spider-Man foes, it's definitely a pretty cool comic to get into. After that, what I want to talk about is Nightwing number 29. So Nightwing number 29 is a continuation of the Metal tie-in. So when we're talking about Metal in this case, we're talking about the unification of a very select group of individuals. So we've got Killer Croc, Harley Quinn, we've got Damian from the Teen Titans, and that pretty much rounds out the important members of the team. So they're currently battling in Mr. Freeze in this kind of ice landscape of Gotham that's been re-augmented by the cosmic powers of the Batman Who Laughs. And they're fighting their way through these various villains until they get to that final circle, you know, with parallels to Dante's Inferno and the Circles of Hell, and face off against that Batman. So it's definitely a continuation. It's not necessarily a mandatory piece of reading, but if you want to know what happens to Gotham while Batman's off doing his thing, it's definitely something that you're going to want to pick up. It's something that I would recommend it if you want to be a completionist, but it's not necessarily something that you would have to read. It is not mandatory reading for this series. After that, we're going to talk about Peter Parker, Spectacular Spider-Man number 4. So this is Chip Zdarsky continuing on with the storyline with Peter Parker and his sister, or at least his fake sister, or whatever's really going on in that story. My focus in this one isn't necessarily the story that's going on with these individual characters, but it's more the development of Peter Parker as a character in Chip Zdarsky's eyes. And there's this great series of panels, just one page, that I love. Spider-Man, not Peter Parker, but Spider-Man's girlfriend, or on and off again kind of person that he's seeing as Spider-Man, which is really weird on its own. Rebecca London is a stand-up comedian, and when Peter goes to try and enlist her support, you know, harboring his sister, and ultimately fails, he does take the opportunity to do something that I have never seen him do, and that is a Type 5 stand-up set where immediately he gets the kind of reaction that he would expect out of a New York comedy club. You know, his jokes were not necessarily on par with what you consider commercial comedy, and it was just hilariously entertaining to see exactly how the crowd reacted to this version of Spider-Man. You know, the boo, I hate you is just really capped off a really good series of panels, and I really enjoyed that aspect of it. Overall, Peter Parker's Spectacular Spider-Man has been very refreshing. While I'm not necessarily on board with the story arc as it currently sits, because it's a little uninteresting at this point in time as things are kind of developing. There's been an introduction of a lot of different characters, but it's really Chip Zdarsky finding his feet and then, you know, probably continuing on with a little bit more substantial kind of storylines as we kind of go there. I'm not sure if he's treading water until we see the final developments in Amazing Spider-Man and those things start to evolve, but one can only hope that he's got a really good purpose and a really good, strong plan for the future, so that way he can take care of this character and the comic book series. Next, we'll talk about Superman number 31. So Superman number 31 is a continuation story. They've been waiting to put this book, or at least this two-part series, into production for quite some time, and now seemed like a really important time for that, because Action Comics is taking on the Oz effect on the off weeks. And with Peter J. Tomasi and Doug Mahnke looking to start the Imperious Lex storyline, which is really about, you know, Lex Luthor, Apocalypse, and this really Mother Boxian kind of situation, it's really important that they kind of iron out any Oz-related things that kind of align with that storyline, so that way there's not really conflicting pieces of interest. Like if Superman heads off into space, it's very tough for him to tackle something that is currently on Earth at the exact same time without kind of messing up with continuity or creating confusion amongst the readers. So what we see here is not necessarily a Superman story, but it's primarily a Lois Lane and Deathstroke story, which is intriguing on its own. You see Slade Wilson coming out of the shadows in order to not necessarily embrace, but kind of meet up with Lois Lane, give her a few snippets, she writes her story, and then the final page reveal is definitely something that gets me wanting the second part of this series. I'm interested to see how they kind of finish everything up because, well, Lois Lane's probably going to stay alive and Deathstroke's probably not going to kill her because, God forbid, he incurs the wrath of Superman. That's how we get injustice, man. So it's one of those situations where it's entertaining, but I'm waiting to see where they kind of flip the script to make everything work in the current continuity without messing too many things up. After that, we want to talk about Amazing Spider-Man, Renew Your Vows number 11. So this is one of the last issues that Ryan Stegman's going to be on as the primary writer or artist, and this is a conclusion, or at least getting to the conclusion, of an arc about Normie Osborn, so the son of Harry Osborn. So in this alternate timeline, this young Osborn is taking up the mantle of his father and his grandfather before him. However, he's not donning the Green Goblin suit himself. Instead, he created this giant mechazoid that that is going to do his bidding for him. But ultimately, it comes down to the poignant plot points that happen in the middle of those actions. The Spider family is out swinging around trying to save the day, ultimately coming up against the Rhino, which is really a sophisticated ploy in order to abduct the young Spiderling. And what we find is that Peter Parker still has his edge in this universe from when he actually left Eddie Brock's Venom to die before Renew Your Vows kind of went on to this time advancement at this point. So, he still has a little bit of that wrath in him when it comes to his family because he absolutely brutalizes the Rhino. I thought it was going to be a touch more graphic, but it was already a point where you're just like, okay, ease up, Spider-Man. You can stop any time. Man's not going to tell you much more, but it was just, and the Rhino even said so. It's like, hey man, you don't even have to do this because they want you to know where he's going and where to go. They want you to know where your kid is, and he just beats the ever living piss out of the Rhino. So it's good to see that he's got the edge. I'm interested to see how this story arc works out because there really could be this strong connection between the two kids, between Annie and Normie, but we get to see the divergent paths of these young characters. Instead of following the footsteps of their parents, we get to see them follow in the footsteps of their parents in a different way. So, always really happy with Amazing Spider-Man Renew Your Vows. If you want to see a married Peter Parker and Mary Jane, you must buy this comic book. It is like the only time that you're ever going to get it. So you have to read it. It's been solid. And, they're going to do a development, and Jody Houser is a fantastic writer coming on in issue number 13. So it's definitely something you got to check out. I really enjoy it, and I really recommend it for a lot of people. Then as we start to close in on the end of WOJAR, the War of Jokes and Riddles, we have Part 5 in Batman number 31. And what this does is it gives us probably the single most ridiculous and amazing two-page splash that I have ever seen in a Batman comic. But let's start off with kind of, the beginning of it, because what we see is Selina's interaction with Bruce, with Batman during this point in time, because she is the inside man. She's she's putting her cat burglar skills to the test in order to support Batman, which is probably one of the earliest iterations of their kind of partnership and, what's really kind of led Bruce to propose marriage to Selina. This is still a backstory. This is all a flashback in Batman's mind, a story that he's telling to Selina in their bedroom after, well, God only knows what. So, she comes face to face with the Joker. She saves herself because she's a strong, independent woman. And then all of a sudden they're trying to figure out a way for them, the entire group of the Riddler's army to make its way into the Joker's compound. And what do they come up with? Kite Man. Charles Brown, the Kite Man, continues to prove his importance in this overall storyline simply because he supplies the entirety of Riddler's little attack force with kites specifically created for them and himself as a kind of barrage and assault against the Joker's compound, which is one of the most ironic things. Well, I wouldn't necessarily say ironic, but it's pretty ridiculous, and it results in a two-page splash of Batman with a kite, Killer Croc, and everybody that kind of goes along with this crashing into the Joker's compound bearing kites. And then Kite Man, in collusion with Batman, ultimately ends up helping to save the day. We do finally get the showdown between the Riddler, Joker, and Batman at the exact same time after Kite Man's been dispatched. Not necessarily, killed, but he's no longer a player in this game. So it's really interesting to see where everything goes from here because we are finally hitting the home stretch. We have this last issue, which is going to determine what the hell Bruce was trying to tell Selina in the beginning. For all intents and purposes, if she was an active participant in this, she already knows these things. There is one thing that he's hiding, and this has just been one giant build-up to this final piece. To be honest with you, I'm a really big fan of Tom King's writing. However, I could have probably used this in probably 2 less issues. Not necessarily the Ballad of Kite Man stuff. Keep the Ballad of Kite Man. It is pretty fun. I mean, it made us care about a character that nobody's really cared about ever. But, you know, we could have probably compressed this just a touch, made it a little bit tighter, and probably given a little bit better feeling overall. So, you know, Batman 31, it's just, it's a good continuation to get us into the next story point, but it has made me feel like this entire, you know, storyline is just a touch long in the tooth. As we get on to other continuing storylines, we are still talking about Rise of the Robots, so this is Descender number 24, and what we see here is a story that's not necessarily about the rise of the robots anymore. It is about Driller, and Driller is easily one of my favorite characters in the entire Descender storyline. For a metal machine that is rusted and has been abandoned on a mining moon for decades, or a decade, he has probably got one of the most emotional arcs in the entire comic book. So what Jeff Lemire has really done, what the art of Dustin Nguyen's really done, has really imbued this drilling, killing machine with a spirit and kind of a sense of justice that goes along with it. He had a friend that was dismantled and dispatched that caused him to make a rash reaction against the humans, and he lives with remorse. This is a robot that has he has an emotional arc. And we're now at the point in time where he's trying to make amends for that. He's almost seizing up. You know, he's at the end of his times, and he gets thrust back into the plot. So I recommend Descender. Go pick up all the trades. It's fantastic. It looks great. It's super fun. And then the contrast of these very soft watercolor palettes against the cold darkness of space, and sometimes the vicious, brutal pain and kind of I want to say killing, but the sheer violence that goes along with it is super enthralling. I'm a really big fan of Descender, and I think that it's probably one of the best independent books out there. However, there is one independent book that does take the title from that, and that is also Jeff Lemire's Black Hammer. So this is issue number 13. And over the last 5 or 6 issues, actually maybe 7 issues, we've seen the continuation and backstory of various characters throughout the Black Hammer universe, which is really a story deconstructing what happens after a superhero team goes into the vanishing point. You know, when they go into the point of no return where they can no longer venture back to their universe. Instead of being reclaimed in some sort of fantastical way, they're stuck. They're abandoned. And in the case of the heroes of Black Hammer, they have been abandoned and stuck there for years upon years upon years, and in kind of they've basically involved themselves in this society that is in this realm that they can't really escape. You know, nothing extends past the edges of town. And in this story, Black Hammer 13, we actually get a continuation, we get advancement, we get something beyond a backstory, we get the next step of evolution. In the words of everyone that's in here, it's time. The event is happening, and we're going to see the progression of this storyline in a lot more detail, which has me really excited. I'm going to do a full review of Black Hammer 13, so check that out when it drops, most likely on Thursday. To finish things off, we're going to talk about Batman the Red Death number 1. So this is the story of how Bruce Wayne gains the Speed Force from the Flash in an alternate reality. In this case, it is designated as Earth 52, where the Flash is kind of combating this end-of-the-world scenario, which really makes me think that it's the dark Earth 52, in this kind of decaying universal or multiversal kind of alignment. And really, it's Batman in the throes of mourning. He's lost everyone in the Bat family, so he's got no Dick Grayson, no Jason Todd, no Tim Drake, and no Damian. His son has now been killed. So he has no support system, he has no structure, he has nothing to care for at this point in time. So the only way that he finds his solution, the only way that he can process this is to obtain the Speed Force and correct it himself. He wasn't able to protect them, but he can protect everybody if he has the Speed Force. And while he can't obtain the Speed Force on his own, he can obtain it some other way, and that's by going to his friend Barry Allen. So not only does he kind of take up the mantle of all these different rogues that have been a part of Flash's rogues gallery and combine all their tricks, but uses some of his own as well. He captures the Flash, lashes him to the front of his Batmobile, which he's retrofitted with parts of the Cosmic Treadmill, or at least retro-engineered from the Cosmic Treadmill, and proceeds to drive Barry Allen into the Speed Force, destroying him and merging them, so that way he ultimately becomes the Red Death. It's pretty chaotic, it's pretty brutal in that sense, and that's why I'm going to do a full review on it, simply because it needs a little bit more time in order to kind of go over the intricacies of the storyline and how it kind of sets up these things. But what it does is it gives me a good feeling about where every other single issue is going to go when it comes to the introduction of these 7 Dark Knights. They're going to have very unique origin stories that are going to show how Bruce Wayne's Batman on one bad day can really turn the whole world upside down. So I'm really a fan of Batman the Red Death. I'm going to do a review of that as well as the review of Black Hammer. So definitely be on the lookout for those. But those are the books that I picked up this week. But I want to know what you guys grabbed too. So hit me up in the comments down below and we can start that conversation. As always, if you like what you see, hit the like button. Don't forget to subscribe to get more news, reviews, and commentary on comic books, comic book movies, comic book TV shows and games, and anything and everything having to do with the world of comics.